When Clint Eastwood stops at a red light on a quiet street in Austin, Texas, he just expects to get home in peace. But as he rests his hands on the steering wheel, something alerts him. The door of a sedan opens ahead. In the dim light of the street lamp, a man gets out, abandons a skinny little dog and speeds off. What Clint does next will surprise everyone. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified whenever there are new stories on the channel. Clint Eastwood felt the slight vibration of his truck's engine as he stopped at a red light. It was a sunny afternoon in Austin, Texas. The temperature was high, and the heat radiated from the streets, creating hazy ripples on the horizon. Clint rested his left arm on the open window, looking distractedly at the people walking along the sidewalks. Nothing much was happening. Some young people were chatting on a street corner. Gentlemen were passing by carrying supermarket bags. A girl on a bicycle was pedaling slowly. Everything seemed ordinary. That's when Clint noticed something up ahead. An old car, a dark-colored sedan, was parked abruptly next to the sidewalk. He found this strange, as there was no sign of the driver looking for a parking space or unloading anything. The car door opened, and a tall man in a grimy shirt and cap walked around to the back seat. For a moment, Clint thought it might be an emergency, but what he saw next alerted him. The man pulled a small dog out of the vehicle. Its short, fur full of dirt, and yet you could see where its ribs stood out because it was so thin. Before Clint could blink, the man dumped the dog on the sidewalk and got back into the car. He sped off and disappeared at speed. The light opened. A horn sounded behind him, snapping him back to reality. Clint was standing there, in the middle of the traffic, staring at the abandoned animal. He could simply go on his way. After all, who would blame him? But something stopped him in his tracks. The dog, cowering, seemed petrified. "Damn," muttered Clint as he got behind the wheel. He decided to pull his truck over just ahead, to the protests of impatient drivers. He turned off the engine, got out and crossed the road with steady steps. He could feel the strong sun beating down on his hat and the sweat dripping down the back of his neck. But none of that mattered now. He approached the dog carefully. The animal looked at him without even wagging its tail or moving away. It was completely apathetic, as if it no longer expected anything from the world. "Hey, kid," said Clint, his voice low and serene. He knelt down slowly, holding out his hand. "It's all right. I won't hurt you." The dog remained motionless, just blinking slowly, staring at him as if he were a meaningless figure. Clint brushed his fingertips through the dirty fur. He noticed some thin scars on its front paws. The animal was so thin that he could feel the bones under its skin. "Who had the nerve to dump you like that?" he whispered. Without warning, the dog let out a low sigh, almost a restrained whimper. It didn't move, it didn't flinch, but there was a gentle tremor in its body. Clint took a deep breath, remembering the stories he'd heard about dogs used in underground dogfights or subjected to constant mistreatment. It seemed likely that this little animal had been through a lot of suffering. He tried to get up, moving calmly so as not to frighten it even more. The dog didn't react. It remained there, frail and without strength. Clint took a step back and called out, "Come with me, partner. We'll find you a better place." No movement. Perhaps the animal didn't trust anyone, or simply didn't have the energy to react. Clint made his decision. He took off his light jacket, approached slowly and gently wrapped it around the dog. Then he carried it in his arms, as if it was something incredibly fragile. He expected some kind of resistance or nervousness, but the animal accepted the contact without struggling, without making a sound. Clint returned to the truck, carefully settling the dog in the back seat. He turned on the air conditioning, trying to provide some relief from the sweltering heat. On the drive home, he kept looking in the rearview mirror. The dog lay still, his eyes open, staring at the door, as if he were ready to be abandoned again at any moment. Clint's house was in a quieter part of Austin, a residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets and simple houses. He had lived alone since losing his wife years ago. He had few neighbors, but everyone greeted him with respect. He was famous there and throughout the country for his legacy in cinema, but at home he led a discreet life. When he entered, he put his keys down on the table and went to the back seat to get the dog. He carried it into the living room and placed it in a padded corner, next to an old armchair he used to read in. The animal watched him, trembling slightly. "There. It's no palace, but it's better than the street," said Clint with a sad smile. He went to the kitchen, got a pot of water and an empty food bowl. He didn't have any food at home, but there was leftover cooked chicken that he could improvise to feed the dog. He put everything on the floor at a safe distance and stepped back so as not to push him. "There you go, boy. I don't know if you like chicken, but that's what I got." The dog didn't move at first. It just kept its snout pointed at the walls, hardly blinking. Clint felt a pang in his chest. It was like looking at someone who had already given up on asking for help. An hour passed. Finally, the dog stood up, slowly approached the bowl of water, and took a few sips. Clint, who was standing watching everything in silence, let out a breath of relief. At least the animal still had some will to live. "That's good." Looking at the dog's neck, Clint noticed an old, rusty collar. There was a little tag hanging from it, but it was so scratched that you couldn't read any names or phone numbers. "Someone made a point of erasing your identity, huh?" lamented Clint, lightly touching the plaque. "Well, now you'll have another chance." The next day, Clint decided to take the dog to a trusted veterinarian, John Carter, a very attentive middle-aged man who worked in a modest family practice. As soon as Clint entered the small waiting room, holding the dog in his arms, John raised his eyebrows in concern. "My God, Clint, what happened to that little animal?" "It was abandoned. I picked him up yesterday. It's hardly moving, and I think it's malnourished," Clint explained. "Let's have a look." John examined the dog carefully, checking its teeth, ears, the state of its fur, and possible wounds. He noticed old bruises, subtle scars. After a few minutes, he sighed. "He's extremely dehydrated and shows signs of prolonged mistreatment. I also noticed that he doesn't react to stimuli that would normally make a dog tremble or move away. It's as if he's numb." "Any chance of a full recovery?" asked Clint anxiously. "Physically, I think so. With proper nutrition and monitoring, he could get better. But emotionally, it may take time, if he's ever going to trust humans again." That sounded like a punch in the gut to Clint. He stroked the head of the dog, who continued to lie on the examination table, his breathing slow, almost resigned. "I want to try, John," he said firmly. "Then count me in. I'll prescribe some vitamins, special food, daily care. If you have any problems, you can call me." John gave an encouraging smile. Clint nodded gratefully. On the way out, John's wife, Lucy Carter, who was working at reception, looked at the dog with tenderness. "What's his name?" Clint hesitated. He thought of the scratched nameplate. He thought of everything the poor animal had been through. "I don't know yet, but I'll decide soon." A few days passed. The dog began to show minimal signs of improvement. Clint would leave the TV on to make noise in the house, try to play with a piece of string, but the dog rarely reacted. However, I noticed that he now followed Clint around the house at a safe distance, as if trying to understand who this older man was who gave him food, water, and a safe corner. One late afternoon, while he was cleaning out the water bowl, Clint received an unexpected call on his cell phone. He picked up suspiciously. "Hello? Clint Eastwood. Sorry to bother you. My name is Brian Walker. I'm a private investigator. We need to talk about the dog you rescued." Clint frowned. How did this guy know? But he agreed to meet him at a local diner called Sam's Diner, located in an older part of Austin. Once there, Clint sat down at a corner table. Detective Walker appeared shortly afterwards, a dark-haired man in a battered suit, looking tired and serious. He ordered a coffee and sat down facing Clint. "I heard you found an abandoned dog with strange scars and a collar with no name." "Yes, but how do you know that?" Clint asked cautiously. "Let's say I'm investigating a group of people who trade in illegal animals, possibly linked to fights. Your dog could have come from there." Clint felt anger rise in his chest. Do they erase the identity of these dogs? Usually, yes. They erase registration numbers, any hint of origin. But your case is peculiar. The man who abandoned the dog was spotted by other drivers, and they discovered that his animal was marked for, well, disposal. Clint leaned back in his chair. Discarded was a cruel word. He pressed his fist against the table. Can you help me track down who did this? Asked Walker, his eyes fixed on Clint. You want me to hand over the dog for your investigation? He replied suspiciously. No, not at all. All I ask is that if you notice any strange movements, you let me know. There are people who won't like to know that one of the useless dogs is still alive. And if I may be frank, they may try to recover him or silence him for good, so as not to leave any traces. Clint inhaled, feeling the gravity of the situation. He'd been through a lot in his life, but he didn't tolerate injustice, especially against the innocent. He pressed his lips together. Understood. Anything strange? I'll call you. The next morning, Clint woke up to the faint barking of his dog, something unheard of. He jumped out of bed and ran into the living room. The dog was standing in front of the door, a little shaky, but staring at him. Clint smiled, surprised. My God, you can bark, he joked, approaching slowly. Easy, kid. I'll take you outside. In the backyard, the dog sniffed the grass and walked a little more at ease. There was still fear in his eyes, but he was beginning to explore the place. Clint watched him in silence, thinking of a possible name. After some thought, he scratched his chin and muttered, Ghost. You look like a ghost, silent and almost invisible. What do you think, boy? Ghost. The dog didn't react immediately, but raised his ears when Clint said the word a second time. Then Clint repeated it. Ghost. That was enough. For the first time, the animal's tail moved slightly, a brief indication that the name sounded familiar, or at least comforting. Clint stepped forward and held out his hand. Ghost moved closer, resting his head against Clint's leg. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed a world of trust. Clint felt a lump in his throat, remembering how many times he had played tough, men who faced bandits and life-or-death challenges. But there, in real life, all it took was that subtle act of affection to make him vulnerable. Ghost, we're going to be fine, buddy. Clint went on to take great care of Ghost. He hired grooming services to remove excess dirt, followed the recommendations of veterinarian John Carter, and made frequent visits to check on the animal's progress. Every week, Ghost seemed more alert, less apathetic. However, not everything went smoothly. One evening, as he was leaving a grocery store, Clint noticed someone watching him from across the street. It was a man wearing a cap standing next to an old pickup truck. When Clint got into the truck, the man sped off and disappeared. The memory of Detective Walker's warning pulsed through his mind. They might not give up the dog. A few days later, something even more disturbing happened. On his way home from an appointment, he found the gate open and Ghost barking distressedly in the yard. The lock had been broken, but nothing had been stolen. They just wanted to scare you, didn't they, kid? Said Clint, feeling a shiver run through his body. Ghost approached, whimpering lowly, as if he understood the tension. Without wasting any time, Clint called Brian Walker. They were here. They tried to break in. They didn't take anything, but the gate was broken down. Clint, I think you'd better step up security. I'll try to find out who's behind it, said the detective. The following week, Lucy, the receptionist at the veterinary clinic, confided in Clint that she had seen a suspicious man hanging around the office parking lot. She asked if he needed any help, but he just walked away without explaining. Keep an eye out, Clint. They may be following you, Lucy warned. One evening, as Clint was finishing putting tools away in his shed, he heard Ghost growling on the porch. It was a hoarse growl, something he had never heard the dog do before. When he went out to see what was going on, he found a man standing in front of his house, wearing the same cap Clint had recognized from the day it all began. He didn't approach or back away, just stared at Ghost and Clint. What do you want? Clint shot out, his voice firm. the classic posture that so many in the movies had seen in cowboy and cop roles. But this time, it wasn't acting. The man flashed a hostile smile. "I've come for what's mine." "You mean the dog? You've got the wrong address. He doesn't belong to anyone now, except himself." "Useless dog. You have no idea where it came from. You'd better give it to me at once, or you'll regret it." Clint narrowed his eyes, his anger growing. "Try your luck." The man took a step forward, but Ghost growled again, this time more forcefully, baring his teeth. The man seemed to grow wary. Clint didn't move, just observed that the intruder had no apparent weapon, but could have something hidden. Then the headlight of a car appeared in the street. It was Detective Walker, who stopped abruptly in front of the house. Seeing himself at a disadvantage, the man in the cap let out a curse and ran to his own pickup truck parked on the corner, pulling away quickly. Walker approached. "Everything okay here?" "Almost. That nutter was after Ghost. I've already got his name, Mark Anderson. He's suspected of being involved in dogfighting and abuse. We'll put him under investigation." Ghost, flustered, continued to growl even after the man had disappeared. Clint bent down and soothed him, petting him. "You're braver than you think, boy." After the scare, Walker and Clint decided it would be best to gather concrete evidence to incriminate Mark Anderson and those involved. The detective had some witnesses, people who had seen Anderson abandon injured dogs on the side of the road, but the testimony of Clint, a public figure, would be key to drawing the attention of the local authorities. However, Clint feared the repercussions. He knew that the media would run with the story. Clint Eastwood rescues dog from underground. Dogfight. It could become a headline circus, and he didn't want to turn Ghost into a spectacle. Even so, he realized the importance of putting a definitive end to this cruel scheme. One day, he received a phone call from John Carter, the vet. "Clint, I need to tell you something. I've carried out more detailed tests on Ghost. He shows marks consistent with electric shocks, possibly from a training collar for fights. I'm sorry to have to tell you that." "Don't worry, John. Thanks for being honest." The information ignited Clint's determination even more. He decided to hold a quick press conference with the local press, announcing that he would help the authorities investigate the mistreatment and abandonment of animals in the area. On the appointed day, reporters gathered outside a community center in Austin. Clint, alongside Detective Walker, spoke about his experience and made an appeal. "No one has the right to treat animals like garbage or disposable tools. If anyone has any information, please contact the police or Detective Walker. We need to put an end to this cruelty." His firm tone, typical and inspiring, had an immediate impact. Several people started calling Walker and the authorities, offering reports, evidence, videos, and photos. Gradually, a task force was formed to investigate Mark Anderson and other accomplices. 4 weeks later, the investigation moved forward. Mark Anderson was arrested when he was caught transporting injured animals in deplorable conditions. The local news picked up on the case. And, thanks to Clint's fame and voice, many other illegal dogfights in Austin and the surrounding area were reported. Several dogs were rescued and sent to shelters and clinics. Ghost followed everything from a distance, sheltered in Clint's house. Over time, Clint noticed significant changes in the dog's behavior. He started to get excited when he heard the truck coming, ran, albeit a bit staggered, to the gate to greet Clint, and occasionally even picked up a simple toy to chew on. The scars on his body were still there, but the biggest wound, the one Ghost carried in his soul, was beginning to close. One afternoon, Clint was sitting on the balcony, Ghost lying next to him, when he was visited by Detective Walker and Lucy Carter. They had come to bring news. Mark Anderson had confessed to some crimes and given up the names of other people involved. With this, the circle of mistreatment and abandonment would be dismantled. Lucy crouched down to stroke Ghost, who accepted the gesture and even nuzzled her hand, without flinching. Walker, observing the scene, commented, "That dog is a miracle, Clint. I've never seen an animal recover like that after so much trauma." Clint smiled slightly. taking his hat off for a moment. It's to his credit. He survived before I even showed up. A few months passed. Austin returned to its routine, but the memories of the animal abuse scandal remained in the collective memory. Thanks to Clint Eastwood's powerful testimony and Detective Walker's investigations, many people began to report suspicious cases. The issue became a constant topic in the city. Several shelters received donations and support from volunteers. It was as if a new awareness was forming around the value of animal life. In Clint's backyard, Ghost was finally able to run around in the grass more freely. He was still wary of strangers, but no longer cowered in fear whenever someone approached. Now, anyone who came to Clint's house was greeted by a firm bark, and if Ghost realized there was no threat, he would approach curiously, wagging his tail. Sitting on the balcony, Clint watched the sunset. Ghost rested next to him, silent but with a serene look on his face. Clint laughed softly, remembering how that dog had appeared in his life by chance, or fate, one summer's day. "That's right, Ghost," he murmured, giving the dog a gentle pat on the head. "You never know when you'll get the chance to make a difference. Sometimes it's enough not to turn your face away when something's wrong." Ghost raised his ears, as if he understood. Clint put his hat back on, his countenance thoughtful but hopeful. The lesson that remains is that empathy doesn't choose a time or place to manifest itself. Often, the act of courage does not lie in great confrontations, but in small gestures of compassion and responsibility. No matter how much pain there is in the past, be it that of an abandoned dog or someone who has lost loved ones, there is always room for healing, overcoming, and transformation. Clint Eastwood, with his firmness and humanity, showed that we can welcome those in need. And Ghost, in responding to the kindness he received, showed that even the deepest wounds can heal when they find love, patience, and respect.